In the dark archives of St. Augustine Seminary in rural Pennsylvania, there's a photograph few dare to mention. 12 young seminarians, radiant in white vestments, stand before an altar that would soon become their grave. The date is May 15th, 1847, the day they were to be ordained as priests. None of them lived to see it. The Catholic Church has long claimed they perished in a fire that ravaged the seminary, but the truth lies deeper. 13 sets of footprints lead into the basement chapel, but only one emerges. The church sealed the basement in 1848, citing structural damage, and it's remained off-limits ever since. What truly happened to these 12 young men remains one of the darkest secrets in American Catholic history. Before we uncover the truth, if you're brave enough to dive into the mysteries history hides, subscribe now and tell us where you're listening from. Let's discover together what really happened to those 12 souls who vanished the night they were meant to serve God. To understand the horror, we need to go back to 1847, when the small town of Millbrook, Pennsylvania, nestled in the hills 40 miles west of Philadelphia, was home to barely 300 souls, all bound by their unwavering Catholic faith. The seminary, built in 1823 by Bishop Francis Kenrick, stood like a fortress training priests for the growing Catholic population. Its architecture, with towering limestone walls and a bell that could be heard for miles, was a symbol of divine purpose. Father Superior Marcus Whitmore, a brilliant theologian from Paris, demanded absolute dedication from his seminarians, shaping them into men of unwavering faith and discipline. The class of 1847 consisted of 12 young men, ages 22 to 28, all of whom had distinguished themselves through 6 years of intense study. Francis Benardetto, an intellectual prodigy from Pittsburgh, stood out among them with a deep theological understanding that impressed even Father Whitmore. Help me with a like and a subscribe to motivate me to make better videos, and don't forget to comment which country you are from. The seminarians, who lived in Spartan conditions, followed a strict daily schedule, rising at 4 a.m. for prayers, followed by study, meditation, and Mass. However, as their ordination day drew near, strange things began happening. The seminarians spoke of disturbing dreams about a 13th figure in black vestments standing at the altar during their ordination. Father Whitmore noticed their growing unease and troubling behavior. They were often found praying in the chapel at odd hours around a circle drawn in ash on the floor, and claimed to hear a voice calling them to prayer in their dreams. As May 15th approached, the town buzzed with excitement for the grand ordination ceremony, which would be the largest event in the region's history. But on the night of May 14th, none of them knew they were about to become part of a chilling mystery. That evening began like any other, with prayers and quiet reflection, but as midnight approached, something changed. The chapel bell rang 12 slow tolls, followed by a strange chanting from within the chapel. The priests and Brother Thomas, the seminary's porter, rushed to investigate, but when they reached the chapel doors, they found them locked from the inside. Inside, the seminarians were chanting in a language unknown to the priests, their voices eerily unfamiliar. Despite their efforts, the priests couldn't break the lock. Suddenly, the chanting ceased, replaced by an unnatural silence. The priests, now frantic, decided to find another way in. They discovered the chapel empty. The seminarians had vanished, leaving behind only their prayer books and extinguished candles. But what they found at the altar was far more unsettling. A massive stone structure had been moved, revealing a gaping hole in the floor that descended into darkness. Strange symbols covered the walls of the stone steps that spiraled down into the abyss. The air smelled sweet and unfamiliar, making their heads spin. What happened next remains a mystery, one buried deep within the seminary's walls. "This is impossible," Father Brennan whispered, his voice trembling. "The chapel was built on solid ground. There's no record of a basement or crypt here." Father Kowalski, kneeling near the hole, peered down with his lamp. "The steps go down at least 20 feet, he said. "There are more symbols, but I can't see where they lead." As the priest debated, Brother Thomas found a folded parchment hidden beneath a scattered prayer book. The parchment, old and yellowed, held writing none of them recognized. Father Whitmore read aloud, "To those who seek the truth beyond mortal understanding, know that true enlightenment requires a sacrifice beyond what the weak-hearted can comprehend. The 12 who descend tonight do so of their own will, called by voices older than any faith. They go to serve a purpose higher than earthly ordination. Seek them not in the world above, they serve in the world below. Their sacrifice opens the door for others. The 13th witness remains to tell their tale." The note was unsigned, but the meaning was clear. The seminarians had gone willingly into the depths. But who or what had called them, and who was the 13th witness? Father Whitmore folded the parchment and placed it in his pocket. "We must investigate," he said, though his voice was reluctant. Before they could descend, they heard a grinding sound from below, as if stones were moving. The opening began to close as massive stone blocks shifted into place, sealing the passage. Within minutes, the hole was covered by solid stone, and the altar returned to its original position. The chapel appeared untouched. If not for the scattered prayer books and the lingering sweet scent, the priests might have thought it a shared delusion. But the seminarians were gone. 12 young men prepared for ordination vanished without a trace. As dawn broke, the bells of St. Augustine Seminary stayed silent. There would be no ordination, no celebration of new priests. Instead, the church launched a cover-up that would last over a century. The families who had traveled for the event were told a tragic fire had claimed the seminarians' lives. The East Wing was indeed set ablaze, destroying any evidence of the true events. Official reports claimed a lamp had been knocked over, causing the fire, and the seminarians had perished from smoke inhalation. But Father Whitmore and the others knew the truth. What they had witnessed was far more sinister. In the weeks after the fire, the seminary's atmosphere shifted. Remaining students reported dreams of 12 figures in white vestments walking the halls toward the chapel, but never reaching it. The dreams always ended with the sound of stone grinding and a voice calling from below. Father Whitmore, too, began having visions. Each night he saw Francis Benedetto standing at the altar, his eyes reflecting an unsettling knowledge. Benedetto would gesture toward the floor where the opening had been, and Father Whitmore would hear in his mind, "The door remains open for those who truly seek." The chapel itself became a source of constant unease. The altar seemed to shift slightly, and the sweet scent returned at random moments. Several times, faculty members heard faint chanting from the chapel, always in that same unknown language the seminarians had spoken. Brother Thomas, tasked with making regular rounds, meticulously documented the strange occurrences at St. Augustine Seminary in his private journal, which was later found in the archives. He recorded unsettling phenomena, footsteps in empty hallways, doors opening and closing without cause, and most disturbing of all, 13 shadows appearing in the chapel when only 12 candles were lit. The number 13 began to appear more and more frequently throughout the seminary. Students reported counting 13 stations of the cross instead of 14. 13 candles would mysteriously appear on the altar, despite an inventory showing only 12. And most eerie of all, 13 places would sometimes be set for meals, though only 12 seminarians were present. Father Mills, the seminary librarian, stumbled upon a significant discovery while cataloging books. He found a leather-bound Latin manuscript titled Demi Mysterius Antiquus on Ancient Mysteries, one that hadn't been there before. The book contained detailed accounts of pre-Christian religious practices, suggesting that certain sacred sites retained spiritual power accessed through specific rituals and sacrifices. The manuscript also included architectural diagrams of underground chambers beneath religious buildings, designed to facilitate contact with entities beyond the physical world. What shocked Father Mills further were the annotations in Francis Benedetto's handwriting. These notes revealed that Benedetto had been studying these ancient practices for months, possibly years, and had become convinced that true spiritual enlightenment could only be achieved by embracing knowledge that the Church had suppressed. Beneath the annotations were personal letters from Francis to his fellow seminarians, suggesting that their ordination was not the end, but the beginning of a much greater service. The letters hinted at a plan for the seminarians to descend into the depths beneath the chapel where they would serve a higher, older power. The final letter, written just 3 days before the ordination, included a chilling passage. The 13 who serve below have waited centuries. We 12 have been chosen to become the bridge between the world of light and the world of shadow. Father Whitmore, after reading the letter aloud, was struck with a deep sense of horror. The seminarians had willingly chosen to enter the depths below, abandoning their earthly ordination in favor of a darker purpose. As winter settled over Pennsylvania, the strange events at the seminary began to affect the surrounding community. Local farmers noticed their livestock refusing to graze near the seminary, and several families reported their children speaking in their sleep, reciting words in an ancient language that echoed the chanting heard in the chapel. Dr. Samuel Richardson, the town's physician, documented a disturbing increase in cases of night terrors and shared visions. His patients described seeing 12 figures in white descending stone steps, followed by a 13th figure whose face remained hidden in shadow. But it was Father Whitmore's own descent into spiritual distress that truly alarmed those around him. Known for his unwavering faith, Father Whitmore began to exhibit signs of profound spiritual turmoil. He would spend hours alone in the chapel, repeating strange syllables in prayer. Father Brennan, concerned for his superior's mental health, began keeping his own secret journal. He wrote about witnessing Father Whitmore deep in conversation with invisible entities, and most disturbingly referring to himself as the 13th Witness, a title that mirrored the mysterious note found after the seminarians' disappearance. By the first anniversary of the fire, the seminary's enrollment had dwindled to fewer than 20 students. The once prestigious institution had become a place of fear and whispers. Rumors about the cursed seminary spread across Catholic communities, and families began to avoid sending their sons there. Church officials, worried about the scandal, discussed the possibility of closing the seminary. But before they could act, an event occurred that would forever alter the seminary's history. On May 14, 1848, 1 year after the seminarians' disappearance, a letter arrived at the seminary. The envelope bore no return address, and the handwriting was unfamiliar. Father Whitmore, shaking with dread, opened it and read the few lines aloud to his colleagues. The letter contained a chilling message. To the faithful servants of St. Augustine, Seminary, the year of preparation is complete. The door beneath the sacred altar opens once more tonight. The 13th witness must choose. Remain in the world of light and watch your flock scatter or descend to join those who serve the deeper truth. The 13 who wait below call your name. Come freely or watch your life's work crumble to dust. The handwriting was unmistakably Francis Benedetto's, unchanged, despite a year beneath the earth. Father Whitmore's face drained of color as the implications of the letter set in. He was the 13th witness, and the time for choosing had come. Father Brennan, watching his superior with growing concern, saw Father Whitmore's face pale as he read the letter. Marcus, he whispered, using his friend's name for the first time in years. What does it say? Father Whitmore's voice barely reached them as he whispered, They're calling me home. The other priests demanded to see the letter, but Father Whitmore clutched it to his chest with desperate intensity. His eyes, once burning with intellectual fervor, now held the hollow gaze of a man who had stared into the abyss, and the abyss had stared back. As evening descended, the seminary's atmosphere shifted. The stone walls seemed to pulse, thickening the air with an oppressive energy. The sweet scent that had appeared sporadically now permeated every corner, growing stronger as night fell. Father Kowalski, who had been documenting the seminary's decline in private correspondence with church officials, wrote his final letter that afternoon. In it, he described Father Whitmore's deteriorating condition and his belief that something ancient and malevolent had taken root beneath the seminary. His letter ended with a desperate plea for immediate assistance and a warning that the situation was spiraling beyond their control. As night fell over the Pennsylvania countryside, the seminary's remaining students, fewer than 20, gathered in the chapel for evening prayers. The air was thick with tension, the building seemingly waiting for something to occur. Father Whitmore led the prayers with an intensity bordering on desperation. His voice rose and fell full of emotion, causing the students to exchange uneasy glances. When he reached the final blessing, his hands trembled so violently that he nearly dropped the prayer book. After dismissing the students, the 4 remaining priests gathered in Father Whitmore's study. The room, once a place of scholarly contemplation, now felt like a tomb. Books were scattered across the floor, their pages torn, and the once proud shelves were empty save for faded rectangles where paintings had once hung. Marcus, Father Mills said gently, "You need to leave this place. Whatever happened here, whatever is still happening, it's destroying you." Father Whitmore turned toward his colleagues, and in his eyes they saw a depth of knowledge no mortal man should possess. "You don't understand," he said, his voice carrying an eerie echo. "They didn't disappear. They were chosen. They were called to serve something greater than any of us can comprehend." Father Brennan pleaded, "Listen to yourself. You're talking about abandoning everything we've sworn to uphold. Our vows, our faith, our responsibility to these students." Father Whitmore's voice dropped to a chilling laugh. "Our responsibility. We've been teaching them to serve a diminished God, a God constrained by human understanding and fears. What lies beneath this chapel predates Christianity by millennia." The seminarians who descended understood this truth. As he spoke, the priests began to hear a new sound echoing through the building, a rhythmic pounding like massive blocks shifting below their feet. The sound grew stronger, vibrating through the floor and into their bones. "They're preparing," Father Whitmore said with certainty. "The door will open again tonight, and this time it will remain open. The 13 who serve below will finally have their witness in the world above." Father Kowalski stood abruptly pale with determination. "I'm going to the chapel, if there's any chance those boys are still alive." "They're not alive," Father Whitmore interrupted. "Not in any sense you'd understand. They've been transformed, elevated, given purpose beyond earthly concerns. Tonight, I join them." The pounding grew louder, more insistent. Dust fell from the ceiling, and the building began to tremble with each impact. The remaining students could be heard in their dormitories raising alarm as their beds rattled against the walls. Father Mills made a decision that would haunt him for years to come. "We need to evacuate the building. Get the students out, send word to Philadelphia, and seal this place permanently." But Father Whitmore, already moving toward the door, cast one final look over his shoulder. "You can try to stop what's happening, but you cannot change what has already begun." The door opens tonight, and the 13th witness takes his place among the chosen. The 3 priests followed Father Whitmore through the seminary's corridors, their footsteps echoing off the cold stone walls that seemed to pulse with a sinister energy. As they approached the chapel, the air grew heavier, thick with an oppressive presence. Students emerged from their dormitories, their faces pale with terror, as the building itself seemed to tremble with anticipation. A cold blue light emanated from beneath the heavy oak doors, casting a strange glow that felt unnatural. The rhythmic pounding from below, which had begun as a distant thrum, now seemed to echo like a heartbeat rising from the very foundations of the seminary. Father Whitmore placed his hand on the chapel door, and it swung open without resistance. The sight that met them would forever haunt their memories. The floor of the chapel had opened once again, revealing the spiral staircase leading down into the earth. But this time the opening was much larger, about 8 feet in diameter, and the eerie blue light pulsed from its depths, illuminating the space with an unnatural glow. Around the opening stood the 12 missing seminarians, their white vestments glowing with the same cold radiance. But they were no longer the same young men who had disappeared a year ago. Their faces had taken on an ageless quality, their eyes reflecting an unfathomable knowledge as if they had seen the vast sweep of history itself. They moved with perfect synchronization, their gestures forming patterns so intricate they seemed almost impossible to follow. When they spoke, their voices harmonized in a way that seemed to bend the very air around them. "Marcus," they said in unison, their combined voices ringing through the chapel like bells. "The circle is almost complete. Take your place among us, and the work can truly begin." In the center of the circle, rising from the depths of the opening, stood a figure cloaked in robes darker than the night itself. Where its face should have been, there was only an empty void, a blackness so deep it seemed to pull at their sanity. The figure spoke its voice coming from all directions at once. The 13th witness, the one who will carry our message to the world above, the bridge between what was and what will be. Father Whitmore stepped forward, his face alight with a mixture of ecstasy and terror. "I understand now," he said, his voice resonating with the same otherworldly harmonics as the seminarians. "I've been chosen to serve a purpose greater than any earthly church could provide." As Father Whitmore approached the opening, the 3 remaining priests finally understood the horrifying truth. This was not just about the disappearance of 12 seminarians. It was about their transformation into something far beyond human comprehension. They had not been killed, they had been recruited by ancient cosmic entities that predated mankind and now sought dominion over the world. Driven by a surge of desperate courage, Father Brennan lunged forward to stop his superior, but the seminarians moved with inhuman speed, their hands gripping him with an unearthly strength that seemed to emanate from the very earth. As they held him, his mind was overwhelmed with visions, alien thoughts pressing in from every direction, revealing universal truths that made him feel insignificant in the vast, uncaring cosmos. "You cannot stop what has already begun," Francis Benedetto's voice boomed, carrying the weight of finality. "The door has been opened, and those who serve below have waited far too long. The 13th witness will ensure that our message reaches every corner of the world above." The struggle in the chapel intensified as the priests realized the full scope of the horror before them. This was no mere case of apostasy or possession. They were facing an ancient force that transcended all human understanding. The entities now in control of the seminarians operated according to rules older than any theology, and their patience had finally run out. Father Kowalski, clinging to whatever faith he had left, began to recite the Lord's Prayer in Latin. As he spoke, the blue light flickered and dimmed. For a brief moment, the seminarians faltered, their perfect synchronization broken, but then the tall figure in the center of the circle turned its attention to Father Kowalski, and the weight of its gaze pressed against his mind like a physical force. "Your prayers have no power here," the figure intoned, its voice vibrating the chapel stones. "This place was sacred long before your carpenter God walked among men. The earth itself remembers older truths, older powers. Your faith is but a flickering candle in the face of an eternal darkness." Still, Father Kowalski pressed on, his voice growing stronger with each word, bolstered by the other priests. Together they formed a barrier of sacred sound, pushing back against the overwhelming presence in the room. But just as it seemed they might break the hold on Father Whitmore, Francis Benedetto spoke a single word in the ancient language, and the air around them solidified, pressing against their chests and making it impossible to breathe. The priests' voices died in their throats as a crushing force pressed against their lungs, suffocating them. The blue light from the opening intensified, casting shadows in impossible directions, bending reality around them. Father Whitmore, standing at the edge of the opening, turned to face his colleagues for the last time. His face was ageless, but his eyes still flickered with the memory of the man they had known. Tell them, Barbat, he said, his voice barely recognizable as human. Tell them that we found what we were truly seeking. Tell them that the door between worlds has been opened, and soon others will follow the path we have chosen. Father Mills, struggling against the pressure in his chest, managed to gasp out a single word. Marcus, please. But Father Whitmore was already descending the stone steps, his figure growing smaller as he disappeared into the blue radiance, leaving the priests behind in the chapel, forever changed by the horror they had witnessed. As the seminarians began to move forward again, their movements creating patterns that were impossible to look at directly, the pressure in the chapel grew unbearable. With each one who descended into the depths, the air seemed to grow heavier, threatening to force the remaining priests to their knees. The tall figure at the center of the circle raised what might have been arms, and the opening began to widen. The stone floor cracked and shifted, and the circle of blue light expanded, inching ever closer to consuming the entire chapel. It became clear to the priests that this was no longer just about claiming individual souls. The entities below were attempting to breach the barrier between their realm and the world above. Father Brennan, still held by the seminarians with unnatural strength, felt his consciousness beginning to shatter under the weight of alien thoughts. Visions of vast underground cities populated by beings that predated humanity flashed before him. He saw rituals taking place in caverns that stretched to the Earth's core, ceremonies designed to tear the very fabric of reality apart. Most terrifying of all, he glimpsed a future, a world where the lines between dimensions had been obliterated and creatures of shadow roamed freely among men. As his sanity teetered on the brink, an unexpected salvation arrived. Brother Thomas, who had been awakening the students and preparing them for evacuation, burst into the chapel holding a large wooden cross. The cross, carved from wood taken from a tree, believed to have stood on the site where St. Patrick, converted the Irish to Christianity, had hung in the seminary's main corridor for over 20 years. The moment Brother Thomas crossed the chapel threshold, the blue light flickered, then dimmed. The seminarians loosened their grip on Father Brennan, and the crushing pressure in the air began to ease. The ancient wood of the cross seemed to resonate with a power older than the entities below, drawing on centuries of faith and devotion embedded in its carved surface. The old wood remembers older truths, Brother Thomas said, his voice carrying with surprising authority. This tree was sacred before Christianity came to Ireland, and it remembers the bargains made when the first missionaries arrived. Light and shadow agreed to coexist, each in their proper realm. The tall figure turned its attention to Brother Thomas, and the porter felt his mind being probed by something vast and ancient. But the cross in his hands created an invisible barrier protecting him from the entity's gaze. "You speak of bargains made in darkness," the figure's voice said, tinged with grudging respect. But those agreements did not account for willing servants. These 12 came to us freely, offering their souls in exchange for knowledge. The 13th seals the compact, opening the door for others to follow. They were deceived, Brother Thomas replied, holding the cross higher. They were shown visions of cosmic truth, when in reality they were being prepared for slavery. The door you seek to open will bring only darkness to the world above. For the first time since their transformation, the seminarians stopped moving. Their faces, once expressionless, now showed confusion and doubt. There was a flicker of remembered humanity in their eyes. Francis Benedetto stepped closer to the edge of the opening, his voice filled with uncertainty. "We chose this path," he said, his words lacking the certainty they had once held. "But what do we truly seek? What truth have they hidden from us?" Father Whitmore's voice suddenly rose from the depths of the opening, and for the first time in months, it sounded entirely human. "I see what this leads to," he called out, his words echoing strangely off the stone walls. "The visions they showed us, they were incomplete. This path leads not to enlightenment, but to the destruction of everything we swore to protect." The seminarians, who had been moving with perfect synchronization, now hesitated. For the first time they struggled with the influence that had claimed them. Francis Benedetto's voice trembled as he stepped closer to the edge. "Marcus, what do you see? What truth have they hidden from us?" Father Whitmore's response was filled with horror and regret. "I see the world they want to create. Cities of shadow where humans are cattle for beings that feed on faith itself. Churches transformed into breeding grounds for entities that mock everything sacred. The door they want to open, it will never close. We won't be serving a higher purpose. We'll be midwives to the apocalypse." The tall figure raised its arms again, and the opening began to pulse with renewed intensity. The blue light shifted, turning a blood-red hue, casting everything in the chapel with an ominous color. The figure's voice, carrying the weight of countless eons, spoke again, its tone filled with anger and urgency. "The 13th witness has seen too much," it declared. "The compact will be completed whether he serves willingly or not. The door will open, and the reign of shadow will begin." Brother Thomas felt the cross in his hands grow warm, as if it were responding to the figure's words. The air around them crackled with a sense of impending destruction. The carved wood of Brother Thomas's cross began to emit a soft golden light that pushed back against the oppressive blue radiance rising from the depths. When he spoke, his voice rang with the authority of every prayer ever offered within the chapel's sacred walls. "Not while faith endures," he declared, his words reverberating through the space. "Not while there are those willing to stand against the darkness." In that moment, the battle for the souls of the seminarians and the fate of the world above reached its peak. The chapel erupted into chaos as the forces of light and shadow collided in a cosmic conflict that transcended physical reality. The golden glow from Brother Thomas's cross met the red-tinged blue light from the opening, creating a barrier of pure energy that split the chapel in two. On one side stood the three surviving priests, and Brother Thomas, their faith shining like a beacon in the overwhelming cosmic darkness. On the other, the transformed seminarians stood caught between their alien masters and the remnants of their humanity. The tall figure in the center of the opening raised what might have been arms, and the very stones of the chapel began to shift their shape, bending and stretching as if the chapel itself were being torn apart. The walls elongated, stretching upward toward a sky that no longer resembled anything terrestrial. The ceiling opened into a window of impossibility, showing vistas of underground cities inhabited by beings who had never known sunlight. "You cannot stop what has already begun." The entity's voice echoed now, coming from every stone of the chapel. "The compact has been sealed with willing sacrifice. The door between worlds stands open, and the reign of shadow approaches." But Father Whitmore's voice rose from the depths with desperate urgency, as though struggling to break free from the influence that had claimed him. "Francis, all of you remember why you came here. Remember the vows you prepared to take. We sought to serve something greater than ourselves, but not this, never this." Francis Benedetto stepped closer to the opening, his face a battleground between the alien force that had taken hold of him and the humanity that still clung to his soul. "We studied the ancient texts. We sought truth beyond the limitations of doctrine," he said, his voice shaking with inner conflict. "The entities below promised us knowledge, understanding of cosmic mysteries, but they promised us slavery disguised as enlightenment." Father Whitmore's voice grew stronger, cutting through the chaos. "I see their true purpose now. They don't want servants. They want anchors, human souls to bind their realm to ours. Every person who descends these steps makes it easier for them to manifest in the world above." The seminarians, still moving with mechanical precision, paused their expressions, reflecting the struggle between the alien will that held them and their own fading humanity. The influence that had once seemed all-encompassing flickered like a dying flame as their human consciousness fought to reclaim control. Thomas Kellerman was the first to speak, his voice trembling but clear. "The dreams they sent us, were they lies?" "No," came a voice from the depths, one of the seminarians who had descended the year before. "Not lies. complete truths. They showed us the glory of cosmic knowledge while hiding the price. We are no longer human. We are echoes of ourselves, hollow vessels for an alien will. The tall figure turned its attention to the depths, and its voice thundered with urgent command. Silence. The compact is sealed. The chosen serve willingly, it declared, its voice shaking the very stones beneath them. But the voice from below continued softer, more tragic. We serve because we have no choice. The moment we descended these steps, our free will was forfeited. Don't let them claim you, Francis, Brother Thomas called, his voice resonating with power. Don't let them claim any more souls to their eternal darkness. Brother Thomas felt the cross in his hands grow warmer, its golden light intensifying until it illuminated every corner of the chapel. The sacred wood seemed to vibrate with an ancient power drawn from centuries of faith, creating a barrier that held the entity's influence at bay. The choice is still yours. Brother Thomas called to the seminarians. Your souls haven't been fully claimed yet. You can still choose to serve the light instead of the darkness. Francis Benedetto looked around the chapel, seeing it not as the twisted nightmare it had become, but as the place where he had spent 6 years preparing to dedicate his life to service. The alien influence that had once seemed so compelling now felt like chains, shadows binding him to purposes that mocked everything he had once held sacred. I choose, he said, his voice firm and filled with conviction. I choose to serve the light, not the darkness. I choose to protect the innocent, not enable their destruction. I choose, he said, looking directly at the tall figure that had claimed so many souls, to reject your compact and everything it represents. One by one, the other seminarians stepped forward, their voices joining his in a declaration that rang with the pure harmonics of human will. The blue light from the opening began to flicker and dim as the alien influence lost its grip on their souls. As the light faded, the chapel once more became a place of sacred resistance. The seminarians, freed from the grip of darkness, stood united, choosing once again to serve the light. And in that moment, the door between worlds began to close, the compact finally broken. The tall figure raised its arms in apparent rage, and the chapel's walls began to crack their structure, groaning under the force of cosmic displeasure. The compact cannot be broken, it bellowed, its voice echoing through the chapel with terrifying authority. The door will remain open. Others will follow the path you have rejected. But Brother Thomas stepped forward, the cross in his hands glowing with a golden radiance that pushed back the darkness. The compact is broken, he declared with absolute authority. The chosen have withdrawn their consent with full knowledge of the consequences. By your own laws, they are free. The opening in the chapel floor began to shift, the blue radiance giving way to something far older and more powerful. From the depths came not the alien presence that had claimed so many souls, but a voice, the voice of the earth itself. Ancient, patient, and infinitely compassionate. The door between realms will be sealed. The voice declared, its words bypassing the ears and speaking directly to the soul. The compact is indeed broken. Those who descended under false pretenses will be given the choice to return their humanity restored. The tall figure began to fade, its form becoming translucent as its connection to the world above was severed. As it disappeared, its final words echoed through the chapel with the chilling promise of future threat. The door may be sealed, but others will find ways to open it. The reign of shadow is inevitable. We are patient. We will wait. But its voice grew fainter with each word until it disappeared entirely, leaving only the warm golden light that now filled every corner of the chapel. From the opening came the sound of footsteps on stone stairs, not the mechanical synchronized procession of the transformed seminarians, but the hesitant human steps of those choosing to return to the light. Father Whitmore emerged first, his face bearing the marks of his ordeal, but his eyes clear and human once more. Behind him came the 12 seminarians who had descended the previous year, their white vestments no longer gleaming with the alien radiance, but simply the cloth of young men who had faced ultimate darkness and chosen to reject it. The dawn of May 15, 1848, broke over St. Augustine Seminary like a blessing after the longest night in the institution's history. The chapel, which had been a battleground between cosmic forces just hours before now, appeared as it had for over 20 years. Solid stone floors, the altar standing in its proper place, unmarked by the supernatural forces that had once moved it. Only the lingering scent of something indefinably clean and pure hinted at the momentous events that had transpired. Father Whitmore knelt before the altar, his hands clasped in prayer that came from the depths of a soul that had journeyed to the edge of damnation and found its way back to grace. The 12 seminarians who had been lost for an entire year knelt beside him, their faces reflecting the complex mixture of gratitude and sorrow that comes from surviving something that should have destroyed them utterly. Brother Thomas stood at the chapel's entrance, still holding the carved cross that had proven to be their salvation. The ancient wood had returned to its normal appearance, but he could feel the power that resided within it, deeply human, not alien or otherworldly. It was the accumulated faith of centuries, the prayers of countless souls who had sought comfort and guidance in their darkest hours. The students who had witnessed the night's events huddled in the corridor beyond, their young faces reflecting confusion and fear that would take years to fully process. They had seen their faith tested in ways no theological education could have prepared them for, but they had also seen that faith triumph over forces that sought to corrupt and destroy it. Father Mills, Father Brennan, and Father Kowalski gathered around their superior, their relief evident in every gesture. They had watched Father Whitmore walk voluntarily into damnation, and now they could hardly believe he stood among them once more, his humanity restored and his faith stronger than ever. "How do we explain this?" Father Brennan asked quietly. "How do we tell the church hierarchy what really happened here?" Father Whitmore looked up from his prayers, his eyes clear and purposeful. "We tell them the truth," he said simply. "All of it. The entities that sought to use our seminary as an anchor point for invasion. The seminarians who were deceived into believing they were serving a higher purpose. The cosmic laws that govern supernatural contracts everything. And if they don't believe us," Father Kowalski asked, "then we'll show them the evidence," Father Whitmore replied, gesturing toward a leather-bound journal that lay on the altar. The book had appeared when the seminarians emerged from the depths, its pages filled with detailed accounts of their experiences in the realm below. Francis and his classmates have documented everything they saw and experienced. The underground cities, the entities that rule there, the cosmic laws that govern their interactions with our world. It's all there. Francis Benedetto, who had been silent since his return from the depths, finally spoke. "We saw what they wanted to do to our world," he said, his voice carrying the weight of experiences that had aged him beyond his years. "The entities below don't seek to destroy humanity outright. They want to transform it to make us willing servants in a cosmic order that denies everything sacred and beautiful about existence. Oh, they showed us visions of the future they were working toward." Thomas Kellerman added, "Cities where humans lived in constant fear, where faith itself had been corrupted into a tool of oppression and despair." Father Whitmore nodded gravely, his gaze turning toward the journal. "The world they sought to create is one of darkness, but we have a choice, and by God's grace we still have time to fight against it." The seminarians who had once been lost now knelt in the light of the chapel, their faith renewed. The morning sun poured in through the windows, casting golden beams of light across the altar, as the dawn of a new chapter began, not just for St. Augustine Seminary, but for all who would listen to their story. "They wanted to use our seminary as a template," Father Whitmore said softly, as the weight of their shared experience hung in the air. "A place where future priests would be trained to serve their purposes, not God's." Brother Thomas set the cross carefully on a nearby pew, stepping forward to address the group. The question now is what we do with this knowledge. Do we close the seminary and pretend none of this happened? Do we relocate and start fresh somewhere else, or do we stay and ensure that what happened here never happens again? Father Whitmore stood, his decision already made. "We stay," he declared with quiet conviction. "This place has been tested by forces that sought to corrupt it, and it has emerged stronger. The entities below chose this location because it sits on ground that was sacred long before Christianity arrived in the New World. That sacredness protected us when our faith alone might not have been enough. But the students," Father Mills protested, his voice filled with concern, "their families will never trust us again. The reputation of this place, we'll rebuild it through our actions." Father Whitmore interrupted gently but firmly. "We'll be more careful about who we accept as seminarians. We'll study the warning signs that led to Francis and his classmates being vulnerable to alien influence. We'll teach future priests not just theology and doctrine, but how to recognize and resist supernatural threats that seek to corrupt the church from within." Francis Benedetto, who had been listening with a mixture of awe and disbelief, spoke hesitantly. "You want us to stay after what we did, after what we almost caused?" "You were deceived," Father Whitmore replied with quiet compassion, "shown partial truths, and led to believe that abandoning your earthly responsibilities would lead to greater service. The entities below are masters of manipulation, able to make the darkest choices seem like acts of divine inspiration. Your mistake was in believing that true faith requires abandoning the world instead of serving it." Before anyone could respond, a sound interrupted their conversation, a procession of carriages approaching the seminary. Through the chapel windows they could see the black vehicles making their way up the hill. Church officials from Philadelphia, no doubt responding to Father Kowalski's urgent letters. Bishop Kendrick himself was in the lead carriage, his face grave with concern. "They're here sooner than expected." Father Brennan observed, his tone a mix of apprehension and anticipation. "Good," Father Whitmore replied. "The sooner we tell them what really happened, the sooner we can begin the work of rebuilding." As the church officials entered the seminary, Father Whitmore gathered the leather-bound journal and prepared to tell a story that would challenge every assumption about the nature of faith, the reality of supernatural threats, and the responsibility of religious institutions to protect both their members and the world at large. The investigation that followed lasted 3 weeks and involved theologians, historians, and even representatives from the Vatican's most secretive departments. The evidence presented by Father Whitmore and the returned seminarians was exhaustive and undeniable. The journal they had brought back from the depths contained information that could not have been fabricated. Detailed descriptions of cosmic laws, alien technologies, and supernatural hierarchies matched ancient texts found in the Vatican's most restricted archives. In the end, the Church made a decision that would affect Catholic institutions throughout the United States. St. Augustine Seminary would remain open, but it would be transformed into something new. A training ground not just for priests, but for those called to defend the faith against supernatural threats. The curriculum would now include studies in comparative mythology, cosmic law, and the recognition of alien influences that sought to corrupt religious institutions. The 12 seminarians who had been lost for a year chose to continue their studies, but their ordination was delayed by 2 additional years while they underwent intensive counseling and retraining. They had seen too much, experienced too much to simply return to the traditional path of priestly service. Instead, they would become specialists in identifying and countering supernatural threats to the Church. Francis Benedetto, whose intellectual brilliance had made him a target for the entities below, devoted himself to creating a comprehensive guide for recognizing alien influence. His work would eventually be distributed to seminaries throughout the Catholic world, helping to prevent future incidents like the one that had nearly destroyed St. Augustine. Brother Thomas was elevated to Father Thomas and placed in charge of the seminary's new Department of Supernatural Defense. The carved cross that had saved them all was enshrined in a place of honor. Its power served as both protection and a reminder of the faith that had triumphed over cosmic darkness. As the years passed, St. Augustine Seminary developed a reputation as the most secure religious institution in the United States. Stories spread throughout Catholic communities about the priests who had faced ultimate darkness and emerged with their faith stronger than ever. Young men who felt called to defend the Church against supernatural threats began to apply to study there, creating a new generation of clergy equipped to handle threats that ordinary theological education could never address. Father Whitmore continued to serve as the seminary superior until his death in 1889. His final words, according to Father Benedetto, who was present at his bedside, were, "The door remains sealed, but vigilance is eternal. Tell them never to forget what we learned, that faith without knowledge is vulnerability, and knowledge without faith is corruption." The basement beneath the chapel remained sealed, but it was no longer empty. Church architects had filled it with blessed concrete and installed a series of monitoring devices that would detect any attempt to reopen the passage to the depths. The readings from these devices, checked daily by members of the Department of Supernatural Defense, showed no unusual activity for over 50 years. But in 1899, exactly 52 years after the original incident, the monitors detected something that made Father Benedetto, now the seminary's superior, call for immediate assistance from Rome. The readings didn't indicate an attempt to reopen the passage, but something far more disturbing, a message transmitted through cosmic frequencies that no earthly technology should have been able to detect. The message was brief but chilling. The compact may be broken, but the work continues. Others have learned from your resistance. New doors will be opened in places where vigilance has grown weak. The reign of shadow approaches through paths you have not considered. Father Benedetto knew that the battle was far from over, and though the door had been sealed, the vigilance, as Father Whitmore had said, must remain eternal. This discovery led to the formation of a global network of institutions dedicated to monitoring and countering supernatural threats to religious organizations. The lessons learned at St. Augustine Seminary spread throughout the Catholic Church and beyond, creating an invisible army of defenders who stood vigilant against the forces that sought to corrupt faith itself. Today, more than a century and 70 years after the events of 1847, St. Augustine Seminary still stands on its hill in Pennsylvania. The building houses a theological college that trains priests in traditional doctrine, but it also serves as the headquarters for an organization few know exists, the Collegium Defensorum Fidei, or the College of Faith's Defenders. The chapel where cosmic forces once clashed remains in use for daily mass and special ceremonies. Visitors often comment on the sense of peace that pervades the space, unaware that they are standing on ground where human faith once triumphed over alien corruption. Beneath the altar where the door to otherworldly realms once lay, a simple inscription remains one few people notice: faith tested in fire burns brighter. The story of the 12 seminarians who descended into darkness and returned to the light serves as both a warning and an inspiration for those called to defend faith against supernatural threats. It reminds us that the greatest dangers to religious institutions come not from external persecution, but from internal corruption, those who would use sacred spaces and trusted positions to serve purposes that mock everything religion is meant to protect. But it also serves as a powerful reminder that faith, when properly understood and courageously applied, has the power to triumph over any darkness. The entities that sought to claim St. Augustine Seminary represented forces older than human civilization, armed with knowledge spanning cosmic ages. Yet they were defeated by the simple courage of ordinary men who chose to serve light instead of shadow, truth instead of deception, love instead of power. The basement beneath St. Augustine Seminary remains sealed to this day. Its concrete barriers are monitored by technology that bridges the gap between science and faith. The readings show no unusual activity, suggesting that the door to the depths remains permanently closed. But those who work in the Department of Supernatural Defense know that vigilance is the price of spiritual freedom, and that the forces of darkness are always seeking new ways to corrupt and claim human souls. In the end, the story of the priests who never said their first Mass serves as a reminder that faith is not passive acceptance, but active resistance against everything that seeks to diminish or corrupt it. The 12 young men who were prepared to serve God in traditional ways instead became warriors in a cosmic battle that most people never realize is being fought. Their ordination came not in a ceremony of pageantry and celebration, but in the moment they chose to reject alien promises and return to the light that had first called them. This mystery shows us that the greatest threats to faith come not from those who openly oppose it, but from those who would corrupt it from within, transforming sacred institutions into tools of spiritual slavery. Yet it also demonstrates that faith properly understood and courageously applied possesses power that transcends any earthly understanding. What do you think of this story? Do you believe that such cosmic battles between light and darkness continue in places where vigilance has grown weak? Leave your comment below, sharing your thoughts on faith sacrifice and the hidden defenders who stand guard against supernatural threats. If you enjoyed this tale of cosmic horror and religious mystery, subscribe now and hit the notification bell to never miss stories that explore the darkest corners of religious history. Share this video with someone who appreciates mysteries that challenge our understanding of faith and reality. Remember, this channel is only for those brave enough to face truths that others fear to acknowledge. See you in the next investigation into the mysteries that history has tried to forget. Thank you everyone for watching the video. Remember to like and subscribe to the channel to watch the next interesting videos.